And it's going to be a book that will just help tremendous people who are already on a spiritual path, and then people who never knew about a spiritual path that are meant to transform in this lifetime. So, I wouldn't say it's not for just spiritual people. It's not. It's for anybody who chooses to be the agents, to have agency over their life, and it is curious enough and willing to do the work to lose the conditioning that we have in the third dimensional world, to reconnect to the divine within us and have that divine guide their life. So anybody who's really feels this tug to be generous or kind or understanding, empaths, people who feel deeply for
Well,
others,
greetings,
people
my
who.
friends. I hope you're all doing well. My next guest is Selina Maitreya, and today we discuss her new book, Raise Your Frequency, Transform Your Life. Now, one of my favorite things about Selina's work is her idea that thoughts are secondary to inner frequency and so cannot be the primary means to personal transformation. To change ourselves, we need to focus on the substrate beneath our mental activity, which challenges the notions put forth by many others in this sphere. Now, Selina was a highly accomplished woman before even entering the spiritual publishing world, and yet she remains befittingly humble, unassuming, and fun to talk to. I'm excited to share this conversation. I really found Selina to be an enjoyable conversational partner and interview guest. And so, with that, I will quit my yapping and have at it. Thank you, my friends. I hope you're all doing well and having terrific, successful, and healthy 2025s. Yeah, so, all right, are you ready to just get into it?
I am, sure. We
All
already
right.
have, kinda, so
Yeah, no, we
might as well
have. We
turn on
have.
might as well turn on their equipment, right?
Right, right. So, yeah. So, what I wanted to start with, I want to get into the meat of your
Mhm,
philosophy, your teachings, your
mhm,
book, all of that. But
mhm.
your life story really informs all of this and gives a context for everybody. Because I find it very interesting. I mean, I've heard you mention in the past interviews, like, oh, I was a photographer. You were more than a photographer. Like, you're
No, I
pretty
wasn't a
prominent.
I wa yeah, I wasn't a photographer. I started as a photographer, but I got redirected into, I think, what was my purpose, which was I was the first consultant in the United States for commercial photographers. The copyright law had
Oh, okay.
changed, and when I was an agent, a photo agent, I fell into that. And when I was an agent, I went to New York City to get trained by an organization of agents. And the president was the woman who, she and her husband were responsible for the copyright law, which was huge, changing in the United States. And so she trained me in the law, sent me back to Boston, and no one knew about the law. So I used to educate photographers in my living room. And that turned into me starting a consulting business. So for 35 years, I was a visual and marketing consultant for commercial
Okay.
photographers. And that was my career. And then I had been a spiritual student and started channeling, 20 years ago. But due to my situation of being a single parent and having no time to teach, it wasn't until I sold my house. There was a whole plan, but unfortunately, or fortunately, I think as the case is, a woman hit my car and my whole life changed. So it just ramped everything up at the same time. It was all slowed down.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. So I apologize for the
No,
misunderstanding, but
no worries.
yeah, you actually have a Wikipedia page for your photography work, which is why,
Mm-hmm.
or now it's
Yeah.
your marketing consulting, but it was related to photography, and so I just found that really interesting and
Mm-hmm.
also it says a lot about you because you don't really stress how successful you actually were in that. Like
Mm-hmm.
in other interviews I've seen, you just kind of mention it offhand, but it was
Yeah,
kind of like a big deal career that you had going.
it
Um,
was.
yeah, and so could you then tell us, so then what happened? What was the life-changing experience?
Yeah. Okay. So in 2013, I had a plan. And the idea was that when my children were older, which they were at that point, um, I was going to be moving to New York City. I was going to have my consulting business for one more year. And then I was going to go full time teaching because that was my passion at that point. I loved my consulting business. I loved photographers. I loved the work I did. I had been published twice. I had a column for 12 years in a magazine. Um, but I really wanted to teach. So going to New York, I was going to do that with, full time within a year. But 2 days before closing on my house, I was driving to clean it for the very last time. And it was a beautiful summer day. It was gorgeous. I had an Audi convertible, so it's a small car. And I was just in such a wonderful space because this home had been so important to my kids and to our family, and I worked so hard to keep it for them when I got divorced from their dad. And so here I was on literally the first day of the rest of my life. And so it was really bittersweet. And driving over to clean my house, I came to a red light. And after I started to go through when it turned green, and a woman was going west, and she T-boned me. She went through a
Mm.
red light with a van at 70 miles an hour. And I never saw her coming. I just drove very slowly through the intersection. And then I heard this loud noise. And before I knew it, the car was filled with tremendous light, and I did not exist. And I don't talk about that a lot, Jeff, because it was such an incredible experience that I had. And words kind of dissipate it, so forgive me if I
Mm.
don't go into that piece. But what I will share with you is that it was the most incredible experience, and I now know that I was in the energy of oneness. Um, when I came to, Spirit told me what was going on. They told me they had created this event as their answer to my prayers for years to be a spiritual teacher. And they told me that I would get out of this car without a broken bone or a scratch because that would be distracting, but that I would be taken out of my life as I knew it for several years so that they could restructure my energetic systems. They could download teaching for me so that I could come out of this. And when I came out of this, I would be accelerated and ready to teach. And all of this communication happened while I was foggy and coming back into my body from being unconscious. And next thing I know, people are running over, jaws of life to get me out of the car because the door had been so squished in. Luckily, with an Audi, you've got a metal car, not a fiberglass car. And it was a convertible, and I pushed the button while I was waiting for the traffic light to change to put my top up because it looked like clouds were coming, which is also good, or I wouldn't be here right now. Um, so went to the hospital, and 4 hours later, not a broken bone, not a cut, and everybody was like, "This is a miracle." And 2 days later, I couldn't walk down a hallway. So the brain injury started to set in. I have a neurologist because I was diagnosed with MS in 2012 and it never shows up. So she had seen me the week before, normal, and then I walk in the week later after being hit by a car.
Mm.
And she told me, she said, "You have a traumatic brain injury. It seems to be quite bad now, but we never know. And within a year, we'll know, but probably you'll be better within weeks or days." And I wasn't. I kept getting worse and worse. And basically, I was out of my life as I knew it for 5 years. And during that time, the book was given to me. Um, it was a time when taking a shower was a major deal because when you have a brain injury, I don't know if you know anything about that. It's very hard for people to understand what happens with brain injuries unless you've been through one. It's very different for each person, but what happens is because the brain is in control of all the bodily functions, when the brain is severely injured, you are extremely exhausted. That's the number one thing. And you're very extremely sensitive to light and sound. But mine was so bad that I wasn't able to read, to type. I could only talk for about a few minutes. I couldn't really communicate a lot unless, I had a lot of effort. So it wasn't like I couldn't talk, I was in a coma, it wasn't anything like that. But
Mm.
everything required so much effort. So for 5 years, I was able to function normally for about 2 hours a day. And the rest of the time, I did what I could. But most of the time, I was in communion with Source because this experience in the car was then my opportunity whenever I closed my eyes. I
Mm.
immediately went to the oneness and I had direct communication. And remember, I'd been channeling for years. So speaking to Source was not new to me, but this experience of going to I'm just going to call it a space where everything was more than peaceful, everything was more than calm. It was the most exquisite experience. And so, who wouldn't want to be there, especially when my experience in the third dimensional world was so difficult and so challenging? So I was no longer living with my kids, no longer living with my in my home, no longer living with my friends in New York City, where yes, I knew a few people, but I couldn't be with people because it was more difficult to be with people because they thought I looked okay and they thought I was
Mm.
okay, even if I said I wasn't. And I couldn't, it was so much effort to communicate. Yeah.
Mm.
So during that time, the book was given to me and I couldn't type. So I recorded for 5 years. I recorded
Mm.
everything that was given to me in my phone. And then in year six, 5 or 6, I took 2 years to transcribe it because I could type. But everything still was so slow. So I am 13 years, 13, what are we, 25, 12 years beyond the event. And I call it an event, not an accident, because I'm very crisp with my words. Words carry frequency, and I'm very fluent in frequency. And so an accident would mean it wasn't meant to be, but Spirit created this. So this was an event in my life. And you find me 12 years later, pretty functional, pretty good, pretty functional. I still find little things I'm just learning how to do.
Mm.
But I really, I got completely financially wiped out. I went from having a very more than a comfortable living to claiming bankruptcy. And now, in the last 2 years, have been able to really move my teaching along, and the book has come out and published by an incredible publisher. Inner Traditions is one of the best, and it's quite amazing.
Mm.
So
That
there
that
you have it.
that's an absolutely incredible story. And thank you for sharing it. And I understand what you mean by how you don't want to go into a lot of depth about it because it cheapens it. Because I had a similar experience overseas that
Did
you
you?
learn to just not talk. Well, not as intense as what you just
Mm,
explained, but again, I understand. I empathize. And I understand
yeah.
what you mean. It just cheapens it, and yeah. So I get it.
Well,
And
you know what it does, Jeff? It's like energy, fine energy. We live in a world of form and everything is very dense. And when you bring in the high frequency of the divine, it's such fine energy that it dissipates. And even now with my students and with my own life, when I have an idea or something that spirit gives me, I don't sit down and think anymore. I'm completely directed by the divine. They share a direction with me, and then I engage my brain to move it forward in the third dimensional world. But what happens when they give me new direction is I always keep it to myself because the energy just dissipates when we talk about it and talk about it. And then other people have their impressions and their energy comes into it. So
mm,
it's just really good to keep important shifts and changes to oneself until it's in the world. And that way it's not just energy, it comes into energy and form. And then it's not as vulnerable to other
mm,
people's energy. Yeah,
mm.
that's
Yeah. I
so.
know. Yeah, and we're going to be, we're here primarily to talk about your book,
Mm,
right? And we'll talk about all of your work, but specifically to
thank you.
highlight your book. And
Mm,
so we talk about raising your frequency. Something I really enjoyed, I want to get into the kind of the overview of your philosophy, but something I
mm,
really enjoyed to give people a little bit of a hook. There's a distinction that you make about so much of modern kind of spiritual practices. There's a lot of talk about our words and our thoughts.
mm,
Or no, we'll say thoughts. Just drop the words, the thoughts. You have a really interesting perspective. That is something that has stuck with me a lot. You
mm,
said the thoughts are actually the result of the frequency. The frequency is the bedrock. Like that's the origin.
mm.
And we shouldn't focus on the thoughts so much, but on the frequency. And so,
Yes.
yeah, could you expand on that a little bit and just talk about how that
Yeah.
applies to your philosophy?
I would love to. So, the work that Spirit gave me, just to take us back, is called Practical Spirituality. And they titled it, and they gave me this body of work. And I was thinking about this the other night, Jeff. They laid it out so beautifully, so completely for me. The work of practical spirituality is all about helping us to understand that we are um, multiple manifestations. We refer to ourselves as me or I. a one-dimensional being, but we are, we are a thinking mind. We are a physical brain, a physical body. We have an egoic field, our low frequency energy of pain. We have our intellectual mind, as I've said. We have our emotional body. We have, what am I forgetting? We have our personality and our history in this body. All of these moving parts. We also have our high frequency. And our high frequency is our soul level, our intuitive body. And that is the oneness within us. And the oneness is the energy that created us. And we are all very different beings when it comes to our personality, when it comes to our physicality, our intellectual capabilities, our history, our personality. But the one common denominator we all have is the energy of love, the intuitive body, this oneness, the energy of oneness. So we have been cultivated and we have been conditioned by society and our families to believe we are our thinking mind and our emotional bodies. My mother used to say to me, "What were you thinking? What were you thinking?" Right? And, you know, and we're told, and in school, we're like drilled into us that, our intelligence is so important. And society all around us really has us believing that it's our emotional body and our thinking mind that we are. But those are just aspects of us. So, what Spirit said is those are not meant to be your guidance symbols. The intellectual mind, the emotional body, those aren't meant to be your guidance systems. But we believe they are, and we move forward that way. And people, they have emotions and they land in them and they respond from them and they believe whatever they think they are. Even some of our, areas of spirituality, change your thinking, change your life. Well, it's not change your thinking, change your life. It's change, in my world at least, it's change your frequency, change your life. So the work that we do here is we teach people, we introduce them to the intuitive body, to the highest knowing that most people would call luck or synchronicities. It shows up that way in their life. But this is a whole tool bag that most people are not using. So the intuitive body, the soul level, is our highest knowing, and that's meant to be our guidance system. So I teach people, I reintroduce them through teachings and practices to their highest knowing, and then they learn how to access that highest knowing and to actualize it in their daily life as their response to any daily difficulty. So we're not thinking our way through, or we're not emotionalizing. We're being guided by our highest wisdom. And when the highest wisdom guides us, the brain then comes in to create the steps that we need to take. Our emotional body becomes the alert system telling us we're out of alignment with love. But the guidance comes from the intuitive. And that's the shift that people make over time. The reason that I discuss the intuitive body and the frequency, the frequencies as the base point, if you will, the foundation for any thoughts or feelings is because of science. Science has said that the brain does not create anew. The brain recognizes what it knows and creates structure around it. So what the brain recognizes is what runs it all the time, which is frequency. So if we're in low frequency, we're in frequency of the past, of the pain past, the brain's going to come in and create structure around that. And that structure looks like thoughts. That structure looks like feelings, which I define as thoughts moving through the body. If we're in high frequency, then the brain is going to come in and create structure that's more open, that's more inviting, because the frequency is high frequency, and the high frequency of love is expansive. So then our thoughts and our emotions are going to be that way. And it's much easier to learn how to shift your once you learn how to shift your frequency, it's more easy to change your frequency than it is to change, which is the foundation that creates the thoughts, that the brain creates thoughts and emotions from, than it is to try to create what's already been brought into the third dimensional world as a thought or a feeling. Really hard to change a thought or a feeling, but to change the frequency that informs the brain before it comes into the third dimensional world of form, where everything is much more static, or not static. What is the word? Sometimes I can't pull words. When we come into the third dimensional world, things are more solid, right? They're more
Mm.
solid, but a frequency is more variable. So that's why that particular truth has been shared. Yeah.
No,
So
I love that distinction. I think it's really profound. It seems simple, but it's really not
yeah,
because
it's
yeah, it actually it really goes to the heart of the whole makeup of all of these spiritual things, whatever. Like so I've thought about it a great deal, and I appreciate you sharing more about. And so when we're talking about books, it's always tricky because like you want to you want to share enough to get people enticed to buy it, but you don't want to say so much that they no longer have a reason to buy it. But your book has practical. It's like a toolbox, like a guidebook for how to
it's
go.
a work. You know what I do? This is what I call a workbook.
Hmm.
This book contains teachings and practices because I have always found it not so helpful for people to just share their philosophies without telling me how to get there. So I wanted this book to have truths about how we can turn any life difficulty from something as simple as someone cutting you off on the road or being on a 8 items or less line and you're rushing to the store because you got to get a loaf of bread or something, but you're really in a rush and you got to get out and there's that person in front of you with the full cart and they're like one and two and you're just starting to go crazy. It's from little life instances up to major tragedies. We have choice, and our choice is in our response to the difficulties in our life. And we know that, but most people don't know how to shift how they experience that rising terror when they're standing in that grocery line. So, what the book does is it teaches us how to do several things that are important when it comes to transforming any state. And the first is to be aware, because most of us aren't aware of how we be, what our state is, what energy we're in as we move through the day. And that's a very important thing to do. So the book teaches us how to be aware as we be, how to know what state you're in. And then the book teaches us how to shift our energy when we're in low frequency, when we're in any kind of distress, into peace, into calm, and we do that by responding from the high frequency state of love. And people hear that and they think, oh, well, that sounds nice. And of course, I'd love to do that, but how do I do it? So that's what we're taught. We're taught to be aware of what state we're in. We're taught very specific practices when we're in the states of low frequency that we can use to transform that energy. And then what happens is each time we transform from low frequency to high, we're actually raising our consciousness because you can't move through the world learning how to be aware of your state, your energy, without your consciousness raising. Each time we respond to people on the road with the middle finger, or we huff and puff in the supermarket, or we yell at our kids, or we hold our partners in disrespect because they're not communicative, we're creating negative vibration within us and in the field of oneness. So when we learn how to transform our energy, as we do that, as we learn to be aware of our state, as we transform the energy, we're actually creating an inner core of high frequency of love within us, because consciousness, Jeff, is like a muscle. If I'm going to be 70 years old, if I want to increase my biceps, I have to pick up the free weights that are sitting across my living room. I can't look at them and say, okay, make my muscles stronger. It doesn't work that way. So when we're actually working with our consciousness and we're doing the hard work, and this is not easy work, I am really clear with people. It's easy to do. It's not easy to remember to do. And we're habitual beings. So we're creating new habits here. So as soon as it becomes a habit to watch yourself and know what energy you're in, as soon as it becomes a habit to take on one of the practices in the book that literally changes your frequency in a minute, because we're in a physical world and there are rules here, like gravity, right? We can't change gravity, but
Mhm.
there's a physical, the physical law of the whole idea of changing our state. It's really one where we have to choose to do that. We have to work to do that. So when we work to change our state, we're really increasing the vibrational core within us, because you can't be in fear and in love in the same time, because in this world of form you can't go upstairs and down at the same time. You can't be healthy and sick at the same time, and you can't be in low frequency and high. So as soon as one recognizes they're in low frequency and they take on one of these practices that engages the intuitive body, you're out of the low frequency and you're right into high frequency. So it's instantaneous. But people have to learn, they have to choose, they have to be aware, and then they have to use a practice that shifts them.
Hmm. Yeah, and one of the things that I love about your approach to all of this is, when we're talking about these subjects, there's a lot of people that just make it sound, I don't know what words to use. Maybe corny, unrealistic, in just impractical. And
Mm-hmm.
so it gets kind of a bad name among a lot of people for that reason. But I love the practical approach that you take to things. And I
Mm.
also love that you stress that this is not, it's difficult work. Like you are very clear about this. It's
It's
real
you
work.
know I'm gonna say it's not difficult, but it's truly work, and it requires effort. It requires willingness. And some people aren't willing to come out of pain. And I understand that. And those people, that's their path. But for those, Spirit has said this work of learning how to raise your frequency and transform your life is literally the PhD work of the spiritual world.
Hmm.
Because when people come to spiritual, there's so many different ways to come into spirituality, and there's so many different ways to practice it, right? A lot of people these days are coming into spirituality through meditation and yoga. When I was a little girl, and being 70, I probably have said that at least 3 times. I'm getting myself used to it. I think that's what it is. When, but years
Desensitizing yourself?
Something, I'm just getting used to the number. It's a big
Oh
number,
yeah.
30 didn't bother me. 40, 50 was a big number. 60 wasn't even a big number. 70, it's just too big. Anyway, when I was a little girl, my dad's best friend was a man named Eddie O'Neill from the Navy. And Eddie, you would whisper, he was a chiropractor, because back 50 years ago, chiropractors were referred to as witch doctors.
Really?
Um, well, yes, it was a witch doctor. There was no yoga studios here. People didn't talk about meditation, at least where I lived, and this was in New York. Um, but when we look at the collective, how it's shifted over years, now there are yoga studios everywhere, which is fabulous. So a lot of people are coming to spirituality through yoga, which is great. You're learning to use what? The breath. Spirit has said to me so long, because the breath is one of our best practices in the book, that the breath is the physical manifestation of the soul.
Hmm.
So when we came into bodies and we breathed out our first breath, we breathed out the energy of the divine that was in us, and we were alive. When we leave, Jeff, what is the last thing when that body, the temple, the vessel that we are, the physicality is on the table? The breath is the last thing to leave. And
Hmm.
so the breath is the physical
Hmm.
manifestation of the soul. And I love that. I think that's beautiful. And so what happens is in yoga, people are learning they're putting their attention, their consciousness is our attention, their consciousness on their breath. They're engaging that physical manifestation of the soul without knowing what they're doing. They don't know they're tapping into that mystery, into that high frequency, to that tool bag of wisdom. But that's what they're doing. And they're shutting everything else out. So they come out of there feeling so different. And they think it's just because they've put all of the parts of reality aside and just were focused in that studio on their body and on yoga, but they focused on the breath and they engaged the high frequency of who they are. They engaged the soul level. The soul level is peaceful. So when you engage the soul level, you have that's your total experience. What happens is that whether people come through meditation, similar thing, you're engaging the intuitive body. You become the intuitive body. And that's a beautiful practice, prayer, beautiful practice. But the place that we really make the shifts are when we come off the mat, when we come out of the yoga studio. So if you have that exquisite experience for an hour of a day, but the other 24 hours, you're still giving people the finger and you're still yelling at your husband and yelling at your kids, that hour is your hour, but you haven't shifted the way you walk in the
Hmm.
world. So Spirit says when people are on a path and they've read the books and they've gone to the workshops and they've caught on to, they've had enough experience breathing and doing yoga and meditation, but they want to change their life. They want to live the practices. They don't want to just talk about them or read about them. They want to truly be of love, then we have to bring it into our daily life. And that's what this book is for. And that's why it may not be a book for the masses. It may be I'm convinced it's a book that's going to be there forever, but it's for any spiritual person who wants to learn and is ready to let the fear and the pain and the difficulty of life go and command their own life, have agency over their emotions, have agency over their fears, have agency over their depression. Many students who come here are riddled with anxiety and depression, and over time, 6 months, a year, 2 years, completely gone because they have engaged their high frequency, and it is a very real, alive entity in their body that is now guiding their life, and it shifts everything.
Hmm. Yeah, I've seen you mention in the past how, because you just mentioned that the book may not be for everybody. It may
Yeah,
not be even may,
yeah,
probably won't even be for the
yeah,
majority. But you've said in the past, like, you're there to work with people who are ready to work on these
absolutely.
things. Like, you're not trying to. It's funny because in preparing my questions, one of the things I always ask, because I'm always trying to care for the people that I love. I'm always
Yeah.
trying to help them. And so I always want to ask, well, how do you get through to people that they won't listen to anybody and they won't allow anything to get into their heads? And then I listened to one of your interviews where you said, hey, I'm here to work with people that are ready to work with me. And I respect that. I think it's a very practical perspective and a very
Mhm.
practical approach.
It's
But
also, you know what, Jeff? It's also respectful because all of us come into this world at different times on different paths. And for people who have come into this particular lifetime ready to evolve, ready to experience the divine within them, ready to experience the completeness of who they are, they'll be drawn to this work. They'll be called to this work. And people who aren't. And I want to be respectful of everybody. So for me,
um,
it's really it's honoring everybody's choices.
Hmm. No, I like that. And I think that's probably a good perspective for me to keep in mind because I think I probably
Mm,
do impose on people too much trying to help them, and that's not my
yeah.
place. So that's a really good perspective. I
Mm.
appreciate that. But and so the in creating your book and getting it out there, you had quite a lot of challenges because you had the problems from your accident, and you also had a series of kind of synchronicities. Can you go into the background of the book itself and how it came into being and how it got published and all of this?
Wow. So amazing, so amazing. So I'm going to take you back to New York City in 2013. So I land in Chelsea, and the whole experience, and this is what happens when one is connected to the divine at a very deep level. Um, a lot of people have said to me in the last few years, well, you must have really done something wrong for spirit. You probably weren't listening to spirit for spirit to smack you upside the head so
Hmm.
hard. And I always find that really curious. And I always say, well, actually, it's quite the opposite. I had been a deep spiritual student. I've been with my current teacher for 26 or 27 years. And at that point, I think it was like 15 or 16 years that I had been with her. And I learned how to take spiritual practices and embody them. That's what this book teaches us how to do, how to we embody these spiritual practices. And so what happened was Spirit gave me this as a gift. So I landed in Chelsea, and as I said, I had a very I had a very lovely life, but I wasn't a wealthy person because I had supported my two kids. I was 95% responsible for them. We lived in a very expensive place. My ex-husband and I, a wonderful man, put the kids through college so they wouldn't have any initial debt from their undergrad. So it's a lot of money, right? So my goal was to go to New York and have a savings account because I didn't have one. But I landed in this building due to my career of millionaires. And somehow what happened was when you go to New York, you have to show up with a lot of money or whatever you need for your rent, and you got to get an apartment then and there. So I was just going to go to New York after I closed. But of course, this happened 2 days before closing. I had two apartments I was waiting to hear about in New York. And when the car event happened, I was so bad within 5 days that I just, all I could do was lie down. And a friend of mine scooped me up and took me up to her farm in Maine, where she had a reconverted chicken coop as her guest house, which was so much fun. But
Cool.
yeah, it was really cool. But all I could do was lie down. And so I didn't know anything. And while I was resting, Spirit came through. They kept talking to me and they told me that if one of these places in New York came, I was to go. But if not, I was to rethink. I was to come back to them because I didn't think. I was to replan. So while I was recovering, the place in New York came through, and it was a place that millionaires live. And I was renting an apartment from somebody who owned an apartment there that I had met the year before in South America when I was lecturing in Bogota as a photography consultant. And it had a rooftop garden and it had doormen. And that's where I landed. And it was perfect because of the rooftop garden. Nobody used it except for me. And I needed to get out of my apartment and just be in quiet because I was in a really bad shape. I wasn't going anywhere. I couldn't partake in New York without it being extremely difficult. I had
Hmm.
doormen who could order, and I couldn't even fry an egg. I was someone when I was a single parent, even though I had my business when I was home, I cooked dinner every single night. And I remember standing in my little kitchen in Chelsea with an egg and a frying pan, not knowing. I knew they did something together,
Wow.
but I didn't know what to do with them. That's how bad
Wow.
it was. So Spirit always put me in fabulous places. So when I lived in New York, once again, spending most of my time with the divine and not making any decisions, Spirit said to me after a year, this is going to continue to go on. And my neurologist was very frustrated because she didn't understand why it was taking so long. And then they did an
Hmm.
MRI and realized how badly my brain had been damaged. And she said, there's nothing we can tell you. I can only give you, I love this, the tincture of time. I thought that was beautiful. She said, Selena, all I can offer you is the tincture of time
Hmm.
because after a year, we tell people this is how you're going to be. And I was in a terrible place. So
Wow.
Spirit said, no worries. When we're done, you will be fine, but it will be quite a while. So they
And
advised
at
me.
that point, I'm sorry to interrupt, but at that
Mm,
point, did you have enough trust that you like really
oh
trusted
yeah.
that or
I trusted before this even happened. I
okay.
was in such a deep level of trust before the car event. And, it reminds me of that saying, I will not say that I've read the Bible because I have not, but we all know this line from the Bible that says, God never gives you more than you can handle.
Mm.
So Spirit knew my capabilities. They knew my connection. They knew that I had surrendered. They asked me in the car to surrender. That's basically what they asked me to do, was just to surrender to them. They told me, we've got this. We're going to take care of everything, but you have to just let us. I was a very can-do person. I was in my masculine energy a lot. I was a consultant to photographers around the world. I told them how to develop their work. Created their sales and marketing programs. I worked with thousands of men mostly, and I raised two boys. I was always telling people what to do, and I was always a very type A person. Although I was spiritual and I meditated, I hadn't embodied yet all of what I needed to embody. But I had really a deep connection. But in my third dimensional world, I was a firecracker. I was writing books, I had columns, I was raising kids, I was cooking dinner, and then suddenly nothing. So when this all happened, I was able to surrender. They told me, you've got to turn it all over to us. All of this going 120 miles an hour. I'm an Aries. You know, Selena, it's not independence anymore. It's interdependence.
Mm.
And they taught me the beauty of interdependence, which in my world means allowing enough space in my life, my third dimensional world, for source to enter.
Mm.
And so what happened is I just totally surrendered and allowed them to guide me. And everywhere they took me from Washington Heights. And I was given this idea during that time to offer my old competitor in my photography world one of my products that he ended up buying for $100,000, which
Ooh.
kept me going for 2 to 3 years when I couldn't make money. But they kept giving me all these ideas, and then they kept moving me. And so they gave me the book in the second year. They, as I said, I had, took it to, um, recorded it for 5 years. And then when I was in Woodstock, started to transcribe it. And within 2 days, 2 or 3 days of being in Woodstock, I met the woman who was to be the editor of the book. And so clear, and Woodstock came about in an unbelievable, it's a whole other podcast, the way I got to Woodstock. Amazing story. And then while I was towards the end, I was just about finished with the book. My spiritual teacher asked me, I called her up because my brain had started to heal. This is really interesting. In the sixth, seventh year, my brain started to heal enough for the fear to come back. And I got to recognize, because I had no fear up until this point. I was in such a place in this place of surrender, even though life was difficult, I had very few moments that I felt as difficult. I mean, I knew it was hard to do things, but I didn't fear. Like, I didn't know. Nobody could tell me if I was ever going to be better after a year. Like, I had no idea, and I had
Mm.
no way of making money. But I wasn't in fear of that. I had such trust. And when I moved to Woodstock, my brain had healed enough for the fear to start coming back in. And I am a very responsible person, and I just watched my money start to dry up. And I kept going to Spirit and saying, "Hey, listen, this is not good. What do I do here?" They kept saying, "Sit tight, sit tight." And finally, from October to February of sitting tight, and I'm watching my bank account literally go down to nothing and nothing coming in. I called up my teacher and I said, I'd love to come visit for a day or two. And she said, Selina Maitreya, I had my hand on the phone. I was just calling you to ask you to come and be a teacher here for 6 months.
Wow.
And I said, really? And she said, will you be our first teacher in residence? So I left this exquisite house that had been given to me to go and be a teacher in residence at the Hope Interfaith Center in Mankato, Minnesota. And it was for 6 months. And when my time was up, the book was written. And the book is dedicated to my teacher because without her, I would not have any of these teachings that I've taken further. Um, and I wanted to move back to Woodstock because I loved it. But Spirit said, no, you're going to be needed by your family. And I thought, well, that's odd. Jake is getting married to Allie, and Sam and TJ are having a baby. Everybody's good. But when I came back to Boston, there was a tragedy in my family that was very unexpected. I won't go into it as
Mm.
courtesy of my family, but my presence was definitely needed.
That's
So I
amazing.
came back, yeah, I came back and I came back in winter to Massachusetts. And I landed an apartment, crazy enough, on this gorgeous pond. So this whole wall to my left is a sliding door, and outside my backyard is this beautiful pond that I get to experience. And that's how I got here. So just kind of being guided by Spirit everywhere I went was perfect and was needed and was an opportunity to do something in the third dimensional world that moved me further back into a new life because I lost everything. So what it took me about, I'd say 6 or 7 years to physically be able to build my life again. And then we had 2 years of COVID. So it's only literally been the last 3 years that I've been able to build my teaching business. And in that time, the book was complete when I came back here. And I started to spend some time sending it out to publishers because I'd been published before. I knew the process and nobody was interested. And then I tried to make my way to agents, and very few people were interested. The concept of trying to tell people who are not spiritually oriented that we have this energetic frequency within us that can guide our life, and that our brain and our emotional bodies are not supposed to direct us was not something anybody was embracing. And so Spirit said to me, put it down. We're going to set the deadline, and we'd like you to create work study programs for your students. And at that
Hmm.
point, I think I had about 10 people I was working with. And so I created my first work study group. And I took these people, I had the manuscript, and it was edited by Nancy Butler Ross, my editor. And I created a 10-month course. And every month I would introduce a chapter, and then the students would go off and use the information and the practices in the book. And then we'd come back the next month, and we'd start off the meeting by them discussing what they had done. And then I'd introduce a new chapter. Well, people made so many amazing shifts and changes in their life. It was mind blowing. So they
Wow.
recommended other people come to me, and I created a second work study course. And then I created a third work study course. So I was in the process of training the last group of 10 when a woman I knew from New York, from when I landed there, said to me, I'm working with a publisher, really excellent publisher, and I think they might be interested in your book. May I make an introduction? And it was a professional thing. She charged me a fee, and I said sure. And within 3 days, I was on the phone with John Graham, who is the
Wow.
acquisitions editor of Inner Traditions, and they've been around for 30 years. They have thousands of books. They have 5 or 6 different imprints, including Findhorn Press, which is a venerable, you know, arm of Inner Traditions, and they're the most phenomenal people, and they publish very serious spiritual material. And he loved it. He said, Selena, I've been with Inner Traditions for years. I've been a Buddhist for years, and I still have monkey mind. He said, I did your breath of life, and it was gone. He said, this book has
Wow.
to be out into the world, and I was thrilled. So within 2 years, yeah. So we signed, I believe, a year and a half ago, 2 years, and it came out in June. And I've been doing a lot of interviews, like yours, thank you, and a lot of book signings, and it's selling well, and it's helping a lot of people, I think, and that's the goal.
Hmm. Yeah, that's amazing. Hearing that whole backstory, it's hard to believe that the book is not being or was not inspired and being guided by something larger than what we see in this world. That's a pretty astonishing story. It really
Well,
is.
and it is of that energy that you just mentioned, because I am the first person to say when people say, "Oh my God, Selena, you're so wise," and I say, "No, actually, the wisdom that I have is wisdom that I have because I'm a channel of the divine. The divine wisdom is what's so wise, and I've become wiser for it. So that energy of the divine, that this work is a channeled body of work. It's all from the divine, and I state that in the overview of the book. And of course, they're going to set the timeline for publication. Of course, they're going to decide how large or not it's going to be. They're going to, they've already shared with me that this book is going to be around forever, and it's going to be a book that's going to be found by people who need it. And it's going to be a book that will just help tremendous people who are already on a spiritual path, and then people who never knew about a spiritual path that are meant to transform in this lifetime. So, I wouldn't say it's not for just spiritual people. It's not. It's for anybody who chooses to be the agents, to have agency over their life, and it is curious enough and willing to do the work to lose the conditioning that we have in the third dimensional world, to reconnect to the divine within us and have that divine guide their life. So anybody who's really feels this tug to be generous or kind or understanding, empaths, people who feel deeply for others, people who've always known that they've felt a little different than other people because they're called to a higher knowing, this is a book for them
Hmm.
to learn how to embody. Anyone who wants to embody spirituality, this is a book from them. So, and it's so interesting because I'm finding men and women across the board, where you and I were saying earlier that usually it's just women. I think there's something about the practical nature of this that speaks to men as well, that there's a process. The book lays out a process that's easily accessible. And the reason we say it's a little difficult is because we're so habitual and the conditioning we have, the ego is so strong that it takes time to do the practices. It's like taking somebody who is perhaps never done any exercise before. They're not going to go out and run a marathon tomorrow. Even somebody fit is not going to run a marathon tomorrow without doing walking, without doing a quarter marathon, without doing, a 5K, without doing steps to take them up to the big event. And this book is the book that is the big event. So it takes
Hmm.
us through all those steps. It prepares us for everything we need to do so we can go from the 5K to the big marathon of changing our frequencies.
Hmm. Yeah, I love that. And it is the practical nature of it is the thing that I find the most appealing about it. I
Yeah.
think it's pretty amazing. I do think it is one of the things that turns people off to what could generically be called spirituality is that you'll have somebody say like, "We'll love everybody." Well, like, what the hell does that mean? Like, how do I go about doing that? Like, you just saying
Right.
it doesn't mean I know how to do it.
Yeah.
So I don't even
And
like,
having
what
the
do you mean by that?
desire, right. And having the desire, sorry, I didn't mean to
No,
interrupt.
no, no, no. Go
Having
ahead.
the desire to do it doesn't give us the process. And
Right.
that's what I find so exciting about the book is that we have a process. And the other piece that's so exciting is we're using our daily life. We're not coming out of life to sit on a mat or go and pray, all of which are great, but we're using the difficulties in our daily life. It's while they're happening that we're getting to shift. So
Hmm.
it's accessible to people who don't have extra time to meditate or go to prayer. They're using their daily life to make these transformations.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think that's like earlier I referenced Gurdjieff, which I don't want to hang up on that too much, but one of the things in reading the book, going thinking about your work, is it very much reminds me because Gurdjieff was called the fourth way system, and that was exactly what he said. He said this is not the way of the fakir or any of these people that put themselves in a cave, which I'm not condemning or criticizing, but he's
Yeah,
just
yeah.
saying we're not hiding from life. We're using life
Hmm.
as a means to sharpen the
Hmm.
spirituality. And Gurdjieff was one of the first, actually, is the first spiritual like
Hmm.
teacher that I followed. And so I think very much through that lens. And I kind of looked at your book and the way you talk is almost like a continuation of that kind of lineage. Whether I'm not trying to like compare the
No,
two.
no, I love that. I love that, and I agree totally. And I was thinking as you were talking about Gurdjieff that there are other philosophies like Buddhism. Buddhism has a different approach, but it's all about not suffering, right? That we were able to not suffer, and this is how you can, or how you can use the suffering or let go of the suffering. And certainly when you study Buddhism, you study practices that teach you how to lose the suffering or how to stay in the suffering, whatever piece you're working with. Um, what I love about practical spirituality and the idea of raising your frequency to transform your life is because we do use our daily life. It not only makes it practical and doable, but it affects so many parts of our life. My students, I was just thinking this morning that if I could get all my students onto a call to talk about all the shifts in their lives, it would be amazing. This work really, I apologize, this work really has the possibility of we're able to affect changes in every aspect of our life. And it makes it so profound for that reason.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I so appreciate this conversation. We're coming to the end of the hour, and I want to make sure we get in before the time is up.
Mm.
So in addition, you have the book out, you're doing your signings. Do you have any other projects that are coming up, or just anything you'd
I
like to share with
do.
everybody?
I do. I would love to share with you. In April, I was given a mission by Source. They said to me, Selena, it's not just a book, it's a mission. And I have a mission to share an all day workshop and an evening before with an all day workshop based on the book to teach people how to use this material. So, my mission is to find spiritual centers across the country and to offer this for free for them so that the
Wow.
workshop becomes not only an educational opportunity but a fundraiser for the spiritual centers. So I have been doing that, and I am going to be in San Diego at the Universal Spirit Center at the second week of March to do a workshop there, to do a sermon, to do an evening before book reading, to do a podcast there. I've been doing monthly podcasts with them. I'm going to be in Minnesota at a spiritual center there as well in May. So if anybody is associated with a spiritual center that would like to have a workshop given for educational as well as a fundraiser, they can contact me. I do one-on-one teachings with people who are interested in working with me one-on-one. And if people are interested in working with me in a book study group, they can go to my website at Practical Spirituality with Selina, Selina, and sign up. There's a place to sign up for our next book group. I started one in October and I'm starting another one in May. And then one-on-one teachings for selected students. Just send me an email to Selina at selinamaitreya.com. We'll talk, see where you are. But that's what I'm offering these days. And I also, if you come onto my website, I hold for my community of people, and anybody is welcome to join. I do offer free meditations, transmission meditation twice a month, which is a world service meditation, no fee. I offer chakra cleanses 4 times a year, no fee. And I offer a hallways of your life meditation that you can look at on my website. So I do community meditations 20 to 30 times a year, all of which are free. And then there's one-on-one teachings and my workshops and my book study groups. Yeah, my work
Yeah.
study groups. Thank you for
It's
asking.
amazing, and
Yeah,
all the links will be pasted in the whatever the box is next to the various platforms that I publish on.
thank
Um,
you.
and I appreciate the time so much, and I will definitely be following you. I can't wait to see where this journey takes you. I'm going to be watching
Thank
it
you,
from
Jeff.
afar. This is very
Yeah, and
exciting. It's unique.
I so appreciate your interest and all the work you do to bring people, of interest to your community. It's just phenomenal and really very, very grateful and happy to have another conversation in the future. So tap out and we'll do this again.
I would love to, Selena. Thank you
Me
very much, and
too.
I hope you have a great day and a great 2025.
Thank you. You as well.
All right, take care, Selena. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.